In a world where technology continues to make advances, where AI takes away the creative powers from man and thus further removes us from the image of God we were created in, our guest today helps us understand why finding God in nature is vitally important for us men and how we must prioritize this time in our lives. Stay with us. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us in another episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are your hosts, Sam Guzman and John Heinen. We are actually recording this episode during the octave of Easter. Thanks be to God. We pray that all of you might have had a blessed Easter, and that it might continue to be so, that we might really share in that love and be men of gratefulness. I also want to thank our sponsor for today's episode. That's Estovere Expeditions. They run expeditions. They run these retreats for men out in the wilderness. We're going to put their link in the show note. Definitely check them out. We've got Father Kenneth LeBlanc joining us on the episode today, and he's actually going to be the priest at one of those retreats in July, and we'll get to that later. But just thank you for our sponsor, Estovere Expeditions. So today we are joined by Father Kenneth LeBlanc. He was born and raised in Rogersville, New Brunswick, Canada. He joined the priestly congregation of the Legionnaires of Christ in Connecticut in 1990. He continued his studies in the USA, Canada, and over to Italy, and earned his philosophy and theology degrees from Regina Epistolorum in Rome. I think I said that right, on December 25th, 2002. He was ordained a priest in Rome, Italy. Thanks be to God. Some other information about Father Kenneth here is that he is a chaplain of the Regnum Christi movement there in Canada. And throughout his ministry, Father Kenneth has been working to help people live out their baptismal calling to the fullest and accompanies them to become their full potential as apostles for the missions. He does a lot of other great things, such as leading these retreats and pilgrimages for men and for women. He currently resides in Calgary, Alberta, and he enjoys spending time out hiking and scrambling in the beautiful Canadian Rockies, which he lives right next door to. Thanks be to God. Father, how are you doing today?
Very good. So happy to be here.
No, we really appreciate it. So, for our first question, just to get men to know you a little bit more, tell us a little bit of story about why you chose to become a legionnaire, why you chose this pathway in your priesthood. Just love to hear how God called you.
Sure. It would be surprising because at 5 years old in my family, there was very little religion. There was no prayer. My parents were French Canadian, and French Canadians were all Catholics, but a lot of them don't practice. So my dad was in the 60s, 70s, living the hippie lifestyle, and they were quite young. They got married. They were only 18 and 16. And so they had me when my mom was 17, my dad was 19. So I kind of saw them grow, and mature. But when I was 5 years old, there was no religion, there was no prayer. And then all I remember is my dad coming home one day, and he completely changed. It's because he had been hitchhiking, and he was picked up by this hermit. We live not far from a monastery, a Trappist monastery. And there was a hermit that lived on that land in the woods. And so he stopped to pick up my dad. And they started having a conversation. So, and it just completely changed him. And he just arrived home, and we started saying the rosary every day, go to mass every Sunday, going to confession, every month or so. Yeah, it was a complete change. So this guy was really a pretty special guy. He was a medical doctor. We had left everything. He used to be a banker. He used to be he's from all over the world. And he spoke like 7 languages. Now he's, at that point, he was like a rabbinical scholar, wrote books to help the Jews discover Christ. And so he lived like 2 kilometers from my house. And so he's the one that picked up my dad. He looked like Gandalf, he had like long white hair, long white.
The story just gets better. Yes.
So my dad became really good friends with him. He brought him to our house. And So when he saw me, the hermit, he said to my dad, he's going to be a priest one day.
Wow.
So my dad never told me this, because he didn't want that to influence me, but he told it to me later on. And I always felt that hermit always had that man, Brother Anthony Opiso, that was his name. He always had sort of like an eye on me, to help me out a bit. So I became later on much closer friends with him. But anyway, so he really changed my dad, and my mom followed along. She was very happy because things were not going so well. And so the whole family changed, became sort of very Catholic family, and did a lot of prayers, and we came close to God. And so that was sort of the beginning, of
Wow.
that road towards the priesthood. And I remember thinking about the priesthood since I was 5 or 6 years old, praying the rosary, seeing those monks, seeing that monk, the Trappist. It made me like wonder about those guys. It just made me, I want to be one of those guys, And so I had that desire always to be a priest from that day on. So,
Wow.
and then moving along, when I was a teenager, I kind of put it aside. I didn't pray as much. Good kid, going to mass on Sundays, things like that. But I kind of left. My relationship with God was not as strong as it was when I was a kid. And so the priesthood, I still felt it. But I didn't want anything to do with it, So I was more interested in the weekends and my friends. And when I was about 16 years old, I felt sort of an emptiness about life because, so we're all kind of living for the weekend, we just kind of can't wait for the weekend to arrive. But then that goes by very quickly. One day. And then so I was always trying to look for a reason to live on Monday. What makes you tick on Monday,
Wow.
So I started thinking about God again. And so I started longing for some deeper thing. So because I felt, what's after this? There's going to be university. And then it's like I just felt sort of my childhood is gone now. Now I have to be serious about life. And so I was looking for more meaning. And I remembered what my dad told me when I was about 7 or 8. He always told me, one day we're going to go to the Trappist monastery and we're going to do a retreat there together. And for some reason, because my dad told me that, I always had it in me that one day I'll do a retreat there. And so like the Holy Spirit or God reminded me at that time, hey, you should go do that retreat that your dad was talking about. It's funny how something your dad says to you when you're like 6 or 7, you remember it so clearly. It's just that God used that when I was 16. He never mentioned it afterwards, but he used that to bring me there. And so I ended up at 16 years old, my leather jacket, jeans, long hair, and on a Friday night at this Trappist monastery. And I remember there was a voice that was telling me that night, because I was the only guy there, the only young guy there. And so he said, well, what are you doing here? You're the only weird guy on a Friday night that's here on a Friday night. And remember, there's a party going on over there. Why don't you go there? So there was always this voice speaking to me, and I almost left that night. But then there was another voice talking to me, deep down, like a little still in your conscience, right? Saying, go on your knees, pray the rosary. And so I decided to listen to that. And I went on my knees, prayed the rosary. And all of a sudden, that other voice that was trying to get me out got away. It was gone. And so, and I stayed there and I started reading books about St. Francis, and I felt this incredible peace. And just, I was on my own there. And it just started like a relationship with God that was much deeper than ever before, because I stayed there at that retreat, And anyway, I went home, and then when I went to school on Monday, my two closest friends came to me and say, hey, where were you on the weekend? And I wanted to kind of keep that quiet, like going on the weekend on the Trappist monastery. That's not something you usually do. But so I told them, I went on to do a retreat at the Trappist monastery. And they looked at me and they said, well, why didn't you invite us? So I was like, okay, well, great. Well, let's go next weekend. So I brought to the next weekend. We were 3 of us. And then it was great. Then we went back to the high school, and then other friends came to all of us, say, "Hey, where were you guys last weekend? Like, we didn't see you around." And I said, well, why don't you, we're doing a retreat. And then he said, and then they were kind of offended. Why didn't you invite us? And I said, you are partying all the time. Like, you never study, you never do anything. And he was upset. He was actually offended that I didn't invite, So it made me think there's a lot of people out there looking for deeper meaning as well. And so for like 4 weekends in a row, I was bringing friends to that retreat at that Trappist monastery. And they were all looking to me to know what to do, because on a Friday night, they had no clue what to do there. There was no one to guide us, right? There's no monk to tell us what to do. So they would look to me because I had one more retreat than they did, Yeah. So I'd say, let's do this or let's do that. Let's spend all night in the chapel and see what happens, and all these different things. And so, so it was a great experience in that way. And then the more I started, loving Christ, being his friend, I would go to visit him at the chapel, and all of a sudden the vocation became so strong I couldn't say no to it. It was so like irresistible. It's like it's like when you fall in love with a woman or something, like you just have to put the brakes on. It's like this incredible attraction. For me, it was like that. It was, and then I was reading a lot of, I always say, dangerous books, like saint books and things like that. It really made me want to be a missionary, right? And so I was keeping all this inside, and I had even decided, I just want this. I just want to be a priest. I just want to be a missionary priest, or whatever God wants. And then my dad, he was really suspicious, of me a little bit. He said, there's something going on here. And then he asked me the question, are you going to be a priest or what? And then I was thinking to myself, wow, like, if I say yes, everybody's going to know about it. And, when you're a teenager, you're worried about being branded, right? This is going to be the point of no return here.
Yeah.
So it's a time to, there's a line, and do I cross that line or no? And then I felt that God wanted me to. He wanted me to be a witness. He wanted me to say out loud to the world that, I'm going to be a priest, and I want to. And so and then I just told my dad, yes. And then the next day, everyone knew. Everyone, like the whole school, even the towns on all the towns around. So it was quite something. And so from that day on, I was really convinced that this was for me. And then this hermit, that he lived in the woods there, I would often go see him. And he was an amazing rabbinical scholar. He could listen for hours, this guy talking about the Bible. He would just connect all the dots, and he'd even need a Bible in his hand. He quotes you all the passages. He spent all his days, years and years, studying the Bible. So it was a pretty incredible guy. He knew a lot about the church too. So he says, I have a place for you to go, So he organized for me to visit the Legionaries of Christ. Because at that time I had no clue I was going to be a monk or a diocesan priest or whatever it was. But he had an eye, so he felt maybe a missionary priest, So he sent me to go visit the Legionaries of Christ. And the first day I arrived there, I knew it was for me. Like, wow. This is like the first half hour. I called my mom and I said, I think this is it. And so it was never doubted ever since. It's been a beautiful, it fits like a glove. It's just a beautiful vocation to help, to empower the laity, to become apostles. That's what I really believe in that, that especially the power, everyone is called to be a saint, and everybody's called to be a great missionary.
Yeah.
In their own way.
You.
Their own way.
Agreed. Thank
you.
That's
how I got involved in all this,
No, I'm so grateful. I'm glad that was my first question, because that was a great story. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah. So my dad had a great influence in my life, because he was a very he strong on principles, but also
Yeah.
he was very close to you too. He talked to us a lot, and so and the fact that he would lead the prayers, he would go on his knees and lead the rosary, and it was and he would say things about the Bible, and it stayed with you. It was very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, you hear so many stories of the wounds that fathers can leave sometimes, and maybe some of the brokenness that fathers who don't live up to their vocation can cause. There's that old that passage, I think it's in like Deuteronomy or something, about the sins of the fathers will be visited to 7 generations, like that brokenness is passed down. But what I love about your story is like the opposite is also true, that goodness and righteousness and like holiness can also be passed down, and that fathers can have a tremendous impact for good when they embrace their God-given vocation. And I wonder, you had these 2 father figures, almost like this hermit who is like kind of guiding you, and also your sounds like very holy father who was leading his family. And so I'm wondering, like, have these 2 men like shaped how you are a father? You are a father as well, a spiritual father. And I'm wondering if their influence has shaped how you approach your work as a priest, in either subtle ways or big ways. Like, have those 2 figures kind of shaped how you guide the faithful and minister to them?
Definitely. I always think about their example. My dad was not the perfect man, but he did a lot of great things right. And he was just very honest, and just a guy that, and he's fun to be with and all that. But at the same time, he was strong on principles, and he wasn't afraid to be humble and admit his mistakes and things like that. For me, that's what really struck with me with my dad, is that he was able to, to be very honest with his mistakes, and then say, yeah, then I'm going to try to make things better. And like he's the type of person that wouldn't be afraid to say his confession in front of everybody. Like and I remember as a priest, sometimes he would come to confession to me, his own son. So I admire my dad. I said, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that, because probably even recommended you don't. I don't care. So my dad is like that, and I always try to live up to that. I'm not as good as him probably, but I always have his example in my head about that, and just a man that tries to do God's will, and he prays, and so that's very good. And then the hermit, he asked me if he helped me to be on this vocation. He said, you have to repay me by praying for me. So he said that's how you're going to repay me. Every time you celebrate Mass, you think of me. So and say a prayer for me. So every time I celebrate Mass now, I think of him, because in the end, him, like if we meet for him, I don't even know if I'd be a practicing Catholic right now. I could be on drugs right now, or wherever he was. And he stepped up. He actually reached out to my dad, and that had a huge influence on my family. And yeah, so it's pretty amazing thing. His sense of God and God's will, and loving the love of Scripture, that has really struck with me as well, for that hermit.
Yeah. Wow, I think that's just great. I wanted to switch a little bit and talk about nature. I want to hear from you, Father, and what it is that you find in nature. We know as Catholic men, esto vir, right? That means be a man or act like a man. It's so important for us to reconnect with God, and one of those things that broke at the fall of man was our relationship with creation and with nature. And I'd just love to hear from you about what it is that you love about nature. I know that you like to go hiking. I also read that you do these pilgrimage retreats and treks across the wilderness and stuff. Would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. the wilderness has always been very close to me because we live in New Brunswick. We're just like it's a lot like the state of Maine. It's just all woods, and very few people live there. And like in the back of our house, we could get lost because 60 miles of woods behind our house. And so all my uncles were all hunters. My grandparents were all hunters, and so a lot of woodsmen, fishing, all kinds of things. And so we would always often go in the woods to play or to go hunting and to go and just to camp out there. And somehow, especially when I became more involved with God, more of a deeper relationship with him, especially with prayer, I started even more loving nature. I always saw God in nature in many ways. It's like it brings me closer to him. It helps my prayer. Sometimes I would just go a whole weekend just camping out there, and then it's like a retreat for me, just to hear the silence that is out there. It's very very amazing, So nature, and then in our formation as legionaries, that's one thing I really loved about it. One day a week, we'd always go on a hike, hike in the mountains. So we would go three together, teams of three, and then we would go hiking on the trails and spend all day out there on top of the mountains, smaller mountains, but in Connecticut, or just in the woods, and just to see God there in nature as well. It just helps a lot. And so we always did that in our formation everywhere we went. And as a priest, I continued doing that. And then also I discovered backpacking as well. I started doing that recently. Not recently, but in about 10 years ago, I started doing that more, overnighters. And I really fell in love with that. So there was a couple of trips. It's just the incredible silence. And then also what nature teaches you, right? That goes back to just basic things. So it helps me to be detached from things, in nature, you're just what you have on your back, and then it makes you think, for example, why did I bring this thing? I didn't even need this thing. And it just adds more weight to all those miles I'm doing. Or why did I bring that other thing that I actually needed, but I didn't bring? So it just makes you realize we just try to carry on our back what we actually need and throw away what we don't need. So it really helps you to live that. And it's like a allegory of life as well. That we all have sort of this spiritual backpack that we have, and then we're only pilgrims through this world, and we're not here to stay, and we have to journey through it. So we can't just have this huge backpack and try to, otherwise it's going to wear you out, and wear you down, and you're attached to things, and so you can't really journey very much. So there's a bit of that, and then also the dangers that are out there, helps me to think about spiritual dangers out in the normal world. Over here we have a lot of grizzlies, and bears and mountain lions, wolves, so especially bears, like it's very easy to surprise a bear if you're not watchful, right? The bear he's just trying to do his thing, but all of a sudden, if you're not watching, if you're not shouting or whatever, if you're not letting him know that you're there, you could meet face to face, and that's not a good thing to do with a grizzly bear. So you're always aware that so you always have to warn him that you're coming, so that he can just go away, or so you avoid encounters.
Yeah.
So for me, that thing makes me think a lot about spiritual life. Yeah, there's a lot of like dangers out there we have to be careful about, and be watchful and prayerful about, and just to be aware of the different things. And it's even put in the Our Father, right? Deliver us from evil, let us not fall into temptation, etc., etc.
Yeah,
it's part of the pilgrim's journey. And going out there, it makes me think of that. And also the rivers can be dangerous, like crossing rivers, like you have to go around it, the mountains, the weather, you always have to be aware of what's going on. And it can easily, something can go bad very quickly if you're not careful. And it happened to me once or twice.
Yeah,
So
tell us about that. What were those adventures where you kind of encountered the power of nature up close and maybe had some negative side effects?
well, I have one that happened last summer. I was with another priest. He wanted to see the Rocky Mountains, and he had a couple of days, so I took him on a 3-day backpacking trip. And so we were really far off into a remote valley, and so we had to cross these rivers. And I have shoes that they dry quickly, So he had boots, which you don't want to get wet because it never dries out almost.
Okay.
Blisters. So he would always take them off, and it was very painful to cross barefoot across the river with all those pebbles and rocks and things. And so when I crossed quickly, I said to myself, well, I can just give him my shoes. He could cross easily. And that way we just, that's an act of charity, I'll just do that. But, we were walking for like 14 kilometers already, and you're tired and you don't think straight. So I was shouting over the river saying, I'm going to throw you my shoes, so be careful. So I just threw it. But because of the sound, the noise, and we didn't really, I should have waited till he was actually looking at me. And then it would have been better communication that way. But so he was looking away, and the shoes fell next to him, but it fell in the water. So they took my shoes away, and just like that. And it was gone. I tried even running after it. There was no way, So,
yeah.
all
I
of a
can
sudden,
feel the pain even long distance.
imagine all of a sudden I start realizing, oh my goodness, like I have to walk 2 more days over 2 mountain passes barefoot. That's not a good situation to be in. Like I could picture my feet going totally shredded, totally. And and I didn't have any way to communicate with the outside world. It's like the middle of nowhere, so there's no connection. So what do you do, So the other father, he said, hey, why don't we make new shoes? So I started thinking about it. So I got into my backpack, and I found this sort of a food bag that was kind of leathery. So I with my knife, I cut it in half, and I put that over my 2 feet. And I found this Gorilla Tape. Always bring Gorilla Tape on the backpack. You can do all kinds of things with that. So I started. So he gave me the insoles of his boots, So I put it in there, and then I taped it around, and then I put 2 pairs of socks on top of that. And then I wanted to protect the socks, so I had this tarp that I cut and then put it over. It was tough material, and but then I ran out of tape. So, but I remember that I always bring extra boot laces, because that you can tie things with it in case you need it. So I started, tying all that together. So long story short, I walked 2 days with that, with these made up moccasins. And I didn't have one blister, not one wound, nothing at all.
That's amazing.
So I was so stoked about that. It's really awesome. But it's funny when I tell that story, because when I tell that story to women, they always say, they're always concerned, oh my goodness, how you use shoes, when I tell that to men, they say, well, how stupid was that? That's their reaction. Well, that was a stupid thing to do. When, throwing your shoes over the river, right? So yeah, don't do that.
No.
So everything was going great till that moment when I did that sort of a stupid move, and then all of a sudden you're like in could be possible terrible situation.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that story I read in high school of like Jack London had to build a fire, where he's like building a fire. He finally gets it going, but he built it under a tree, and then the snow melts off, and it's all over at that point. So
there's so many things that you can do out in the wilds, right? You're not thinking or something like that. You have to be aware, and you have to learn from mistakes. And that's why I like it. It really puts you in the moment, And then I always try to apply spiritual realities to that, And another thing I love doing out there is, it's like to see the lessons as well that you learn out there, right? Like I remember brought a group of boys on a hike, and I remember they were always complaining. We were going over like this. It was in the New York Upper State. It was It was Whiteface Mountain. And so these were like 12-year-old boys. So from our camp that I was a chaplain to. And so I was bringing up to climb Whiteface Mountain. And they're always complaining and all that. And then I said to them, okay, look, you maybe you can't make it up to the top, but I'm going to take a little group that come with me. We're going to make it all the way to the top. Because I knew those kids, they're like tough and they wanted to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And then the other kids who were complaining all the time of a headache and all these different things, I told them, look, you can come with me if you want to. I'm gonna leave you with the other seminarian. I was a seminarian at the time. And he said, I'm gonna leave you with the other seminarian. He'll stay here, and then when we come back, we'll go back down. But if you want to come with me, you have to make it all the way to the top, and you cannot complain because you decided to come with me. I gave you the choice. And so I turned around and I started going with that little group that I'd chosen because I knew they wanted to go to the top, you know. Then I looked back, all the boys were following me, you know. Not one stayed back. They all wanted to go to the top after that little speech. And they didn't complain, not even once. And they all made it to the top and they were so happy about it. It was like a kind of a interesting moment, right? To see about toughness, actually willpower, and just embrace it and just decide to want to go to the top. If you do that, then you're not going to complain anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so that was an awesome moment I can remember that happened on those trips.
Oh, that's great. So as a legionary, you mentioned that you're helping individuals become apostles, right, for the mission. And, we think about our lost identity as men, not understanding that we're sons of God and that we need to learn to reconnect with that. So what are some of the things that you do to guide men to better accept their mission, to accept themselves as apostles? It's like, very often we have so many men, even those that listen to a show, that really all they're doing is going to mass on Sunday, which is great and necessary. But how do we call them to more? What do you do in these situations to really bring men to the next level?
Yeah, that's good. I always try to give a lot of attention to men because women actually they have a very strong sense of God and the sacred and they usually give me a lot of work. Like they come after the priest. They say they always propose a lot of things, and so. But men, if we have to give them a little bit of attention, and once you do, they really respond. They love this brotherhood and they really love this. So the last couple of years, I decided I'm just gonna go different cities and really try to get the men to be in connection with God and start all these spiritual exercises, retreats for men, and so I started at least 5 or 6 of them. So you get every year now you have these spiritual exercises, and I do these camps where we have 40, 50 men every summer that comes to those, and so they get in touch with our Lord and through the Mass, through the reflections, and they go deeper into that spiritual exercise, those retreats, and when in connection with God, they really grow. They really grow, and they especially, and also being together with the other men. You see that there are other men like that. A little bit like what happened to me with that one retreat I went to when I was 16.
Yeah.
Go on my own, and then all of a sudden, all my friends wanted to be there too. That was a great circle that we created, a brotherhood.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
you get men to be in connection with God first of all, to grow in their spiritual life. And I always try to be realistic. If you only give that 10 minutes, I like what Matthew Kelly says about that, right? Like, if you only allow God a foothold in your life, give him 10 minutes of your life where you really speak with him, man, it's going to change your life, And that's I try to get men to do that, just baby steps, and then having that weekend with our Lord on a retreat. I give them lots of passages from the gospel and and spiritual exercises they can do, and really helps a lot. And then also for example, at the camps that we have here, we have a track just for the men, the dads of the boys. So we have things for the boys and a track for the dads where they study what it means to be a husband, to be a father, and to go deeper. And we have a lot of discussions on that. And it's really beautiful to see that as they discover more and more their vocation.
And those are up in Canada that you're doing those retreats?
Yes, all over, like in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Saskatchewan.
Wow,
all those.
wonderful.
Sometimes I even go to Quebec. And last year I went to Quebec. We had 60 men there on the retreat.
Wow, praise God.
The men are spiritual. They're deeply spiritual, and they want it. We just have to organize it and challenge them. Especially they like to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
And they like to do something extreme. Men are like that. That's the nice thing about it.
Yeah, that adventurer within us, for sure.
One extreme thing we did once when I was on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, I had a group of young adults, young guys with me. And I had mentioned that there's a possibility we can stay all night in the Holy Sepulchre, because they lock the door from the outside,
Yeah.
And so I just kind of floated the idea out there. And they came to me and said, we want to do that. And a lot of these guys were pretty raw in their faith. They just sort of just starting to discover Christ. And so I decided when they came to me with that, I said, oh man, I got to do it now, because that's one thing they want to do. So I have to be there for them and make it happen. So we ended up staying in there all night long from like 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. And that's when they reopened the door. You're not allowed to sleep in there. You have to pray all night. So when the door were locked, boom. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, 9 p.m. and you have all night to be in there. It's pretty intimidating.
Wow, that would be. Yeah.
And so they all looked at me, what do we do now? And I did exactly what I did when I was 16. I said, well, let's say a rosary together. So we started saying a rosary, and that really gets you in the mood. It really gets you to pray. If you have a hard time praying, say the rosary, it just really does that. And then we went to Calvary, because in the Holy Sepulchre you have both Calvary and you also have the tomb, the empty tomb. So, and you're in there all night. You have access to those things all night long. So I brought them to Calvary, and we read all the passages from the Passion, where exactly happened right there, right? And then we would meet in the tomb and read all the passages about the resurrection. Anyway, we did that all night, all these things, and it went by like that. And then the end of the pilgrimage, I asked everyone, what was it that hit you the most, and what did you like the most? They didn't say the Dead Sea or all the other stuff. They said it was that night we spent together in the Holy Sepulchre. Just that experience for them, it was totally out of this world. Yeah,
transformative.
Transformative, and it was an extreme thing, but together. And so I think if we can provide experiences like that with men, they really take to that.
I love it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, cognitive, like lectures and information can only get you so far. Like at some level, men really respond to that experiential element. And so you're part of these retreats with this Estovira expeditions, but like, what is it that's so powerful about getting men out in the wilderness, out of their comfort zone, and like what is powerful about that in your experience? Like, what have you seen happen in men as they kind of go on these expeditions? And yes, there's a spiritual element, and but what do you see happen in those moments?
Well, yes, there is that being totally disconnected, right? When you can't go on your phone, you can't go on internet. It's not available to you, and you have to fend for water, and you have to, who's going to get the firewood, and you really quickly see who's only thinking about themselves all the time. Those who are braggarts, oh, I'm good at this, good at that. when you go on these trips, you start realizing who really helps out, who really, and then you learn those lessons, and also the silence and around the campfire with the right kind of discussions, right? Because all even there you can make it in a way that's very worldly, but we try to bring in the gospel, try to bring in good discussions about what it means to be a man, what it means to be husband, father, and then also how to be a spiritual leader in their house, and to be a man of God, and all these different things. And so that whole experience together, that atmosphere, really brings them to think about their life.
Yeah. Reminds me of John Paul II saying that, through the glories of nature, we recognize the infinite power of the Creator, right? And we're able to connect with that power and experience that transformation. Well, I want to take a moment and just talk briefly about Estovir expeditions. So, man, if you are interested, obviously Father's going to be leading the one in July 12th through the 16th in Golden, Colorado there. He's going to be saying Mass daily. It is for men of all ages. I know men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that are going to be there. I'm sure there's men in their 60s, so not to exclude anybody. Definitely encourage you to go check it out at estovirexpeditions.com. I will drop that in the show notes. But Father, for people who can't make this expeditions, for men who can't, but they do want to connect with nature, how would you encourage them get started? What would you suggest they do? And maybe it's been years since they've been hiking and they don't quite know what to do. How would you get them to practically get started on that and then connecting with God and nature? I'd love to hear that for my final question.
Yeah, I did. I connect with God, not even on, every trip out with nature. It could be just 2 hours, really, just walking there and looking at the beauty of nature and asking yourself, who created this, right? Who created this? This is so beautiful. Well, imagine the one who created it, the artists behind all this. And why did he create it, right? Why? Because he loves you. It's actually a gift to you. Like you look at the mountains, you look at the sky, you look at the trees. He said, "This is a gift from me, from the Creator." It's a love letter. Everything is a love letter from God. Creation. It's a gift. There were saints that there was one saint. I think he would walk every day and he would see the flowers on the side of the road, and he would tell them, "Stop it! I can't stand it anymore," because they were telling him so much love from God, because it's a gift. It's the beauty of it. So if you see it that way, then everywhere you are, it doesn't have to be fascinating. It doesn't have to be the Rocky Mountains. It doesn't have to be. This is anything that God has made. It's a gift to you, right? That little flower on the side of the road it's for you, So it makes you say, "Hey, there's one here that loves you. I'm right here to tell you that." That's what it tells me. So for me, that's what it speaks, and that's where we can experience all that. And then on my trips, I have the great gift also to celebrate Mass in nature and give thanks to God for all that. So it's very beautiful to have that Mass out there with an incredible background, and the silence also is very nice to have. And then I can even say that I had a bear show up to my Mass once. Yeah, about 3 years ago. So he was curious and came to see us, and so we kind of stopped and then looked at him. He looked at us and took off running. That's the last. But I can boast that I had a bear arrive at my Mass.
That's fun. Nice. I love that. That's so great. And so simple, though. And I want to appreciate you saying that, because it is so simple. It doesn't have to be this whole grand experience, or you go on a 3 or 4 day expedition, backpacking or something like that, which I love to do. But you're exactly right. Just walk outside, leave your phone behind and go on a walk in a neighborhood and see God's goodness in his creation there, and reminding you that it is that intimate love that he has for you. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And kind of drawing on what you were talking about earlier about how easily you can make mistakes out in the wilderness when everything's kind of stripped to the bare minimum. It occurred to me when you were talking, like, in modern men, like, we feel so everything's controlled. Like, you've got air conditioning, you've got your vehicle gets you from point A to B, and there's like always a store or a restaurant nearby if you need something, you know. And it's like when you're in nature, it's like humbling. Like we don't have a lot of experiences like that where we like don't have a lot of control over what happens. And it's like I appreciated you sharing those stories because it shows you like how fragile we actually are in the face of nature, and it's like kind of grounds you in that humility. But the last thing for me is you've mentioned several times like the silence and like how powerful the silence can be, and I'm wondering kind of like what is powerful about that for you? Like what is so compelling about that?
Yeah, it's like Christ going out into the wilderness. Really, the silence, it's about the detachment from things of this world. Really, it's the absence of all that, and there's to be able to create an emptiness inside so that God can fill it. That's what silence really is about. To detach myself from things, and from noise, and I had this, the longest trek I ever did out in the wilderness was 6 days. And I had like a week of vacation, and I decided I was just going to go on my own to do that. And it was the silence was definitely, I couldn't even listen to music anymore because it was so, I found it too distracting. I became too sensitive to the silence, you know? So I wanted to embrace that and never disturb it. And then all of a sudden you feel that God speaks to you a lot more because you don't have all that noise, right? So I think that's what it's about. It's not for the silence sake, but it's the fact that silence can create an atmosphere where God speaks to you more. And you're able to hear a little bit more his intuitions and his little lights that he gives you, little reflections about things. Usually in noise or in occupation and going from one place to another, which happens to all of us. It's a lot harder to hear that little still voice, you know, inside of us. So I find that those treks like that help a lot. And then also those weekend retreats that I do, that's the silence that I get the men not to talk at all to each other at all, just to create that empty space so that they can hear God's voice. And you'll see the scripture speaks to you a lot more. It comes alive. Things that same passage you've read many, many times, all of a sudden it tells you different things now. You know, it's like that hermit, right? That's why he knew so much about scripture. He says it has so many nuggets of gold in there. If you really spend time in silence and to study it, you find all those nuggets. And I would say the same thing, just normal life, if you live that interior silence. So it's very hard. We have to have Tabor moments where there's silence, right? And then you have the valley moments where you have to do all the things and occupations, and you try to do the best you can to live that silence within that. But we need those Tabor moments regularly, once or twice a year, to really go back to that silence, then go back to the valley,
Yeah, I completely agree. Wow, Father. Well, I'm just really grateful for you joining us today and for connecting with all of this. And man, listening, you heard it, get out there and embrace the silence. Do it a couple times a year. Find a way to make it happen, right? Don't sit back and allow yourself to get sucked into binge watching on Netflix and Amazon and your phone and all these other things, because God can't speak to you clearly in that as he can out in nature. So, Father, I'm just so grateful for you, for joining us today, and praying for you and your successful expeditions this summer.
Thank you so much, and God bless you for all the work you do. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, God bless. And as we end each of our episodes,
all right. Be a man, be a saint.